What happens when a man with $1 billion refuses to pay for the life of his own unborn child? This isn't just a story of staggering greed. It's a story of chilling betrayal, a venomous secret that poisoned a fairy tale marriage from within. We're about to uncover how one woman, pregnant, terrified and abandoned by her powerful husband in her darkest hour, was thrust into the national spotlight by a catastrophic event. From the cold rejection in a hospital corridor to becoming a symbol of hope for an entire nation, all in less than 24 hours. Stay with us as we unravel the shocking, true-to-life drama of Alistair and Mira Finch. The silence in the Finch mansion was a physical presence. It was a dense, heavy thing, woven from marble glass and unspoken resentment. It clung to the brocade curtains that cost more than a family car, and pooled in the hollows of the custom-molded leather sofas from their penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, New York City, glittered below a galaxy of captured stars. For Mira Finch, it was a beautiful prison. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, one hand resting protectively on the perfect taut curve of her belly. 8 months. 8 months of carrying the heir to the Finch Global Enterprises fortune, a dynasty built on ruthless tech acquisitions and Alistair Finch's formidable public charm. The world saw Alistair as a visionary, a charismatic billionaire shaping the future. Mira saw the man who checked the household accounts with the meticulousness of a forensic auditor, who questioned a $30 purchase of prenatal vitamins, not because of the cost, but because of the principle of control. Their love story had once been the stuff of tabloids, the brilliant self-made magnate falling for a humble, down-to-earth trauma nurse. Mira had been working a frantic shift at Lenox Hill Hospital when Alistair had been brought in for a minor injury after a charity polo match. He'd been captivated by her calm competence, her gentle hands, her eyes that didn't see a dollar sign when they looked at him. He'd pursued her relentlessly, showering her with a world she'd only ever seen in movies. Private jets to Paris for dinner, front row seats at Milan Fashion Week, a proposal on a yacht in Monaco with a diamond that felt impossibly heavy on her finger. She had fallen in love not with the wealth, but with the man she thought existed beneath it, the man who seemed to see her truly see her. But the gold plating had begun to flake away almost immediately after the wedding. The man who had celebrated her independence now sought to curtail it. Her nursing career was the first thing to go. "A Mrs. Finch doesn't need to work," he'd said, framing it as a gift. "Your job now is to be my wife." Then came the subtle isolation from her friends whom he deemed unsuitable or simple. Her world shrank until it was the size of their portfolio of properties, and the only people in it were his business associates and staff who watched her with wary, servile eyes. The pregnancy was supposed to be a bridge back to the man she'd loved. A child, their child, would surely melt the ice that had been forming around his heart. For the first few months, it seemed to work. He was attentive, almost tender. He'd place a hand on her stomach, a flicker of something genuine in his eyes. But then, about 3 months ago, a switch had flipped. A chilling coldness had descended more profound than ever before. His questions became sharper, laced with a suspicion she couldn't comprehend. He'd casually inquire about her day, then cross-reference her answers with the car's GPS history. He started making veiled comments about loyalty, about bloodlines, about the sacredness of the Finch name. The change coincided with the re-emergence of a man from her past, Dr. Liam Carmichael. Liam had been her mentor at Lenox Hill, a kind, brilliant cardiologist who had guided her through the brutal early years of her career. They were friends, period. when Mira, desperate for a sliver of her old self, had started volunteering a few hours a week at a free clinic Liam ran in the Bronx, Alistair's demeanour had curdled into a quiet, simmering rage. "Charity is what the Finch Foundation is for Mira," he'd said, his voice dangerously soft. "We pay people for that. You don't need to get your hands dirty with them. They're just people, Alistair, and I miss the work. It makes me feel like myself." "You are Mrs. Alistair Finch," he'd replied, as if that were the end of the discussion. His gaze would then drop to her belly, and a look of profound distaste would cross his face for a fraction of a second. It was a look that made her blood run cold. That evening, the first real pang of fear struck her. It wasn't a dull ache or the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd grown used to. This was a sharp, searing cramp that stole her breath and made her double over. She gasped, leaning against the cold glass of the window. Another one followed, fiercer this time. It was too early. Far too early. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of her unhappiness. She needed to get to the hospital. She found Alistair in his study, a cavernous room of dark mahogany and the scent of old leather. He was on a video call, his back to her, his voice the epitome of smooth corporate command. "Alistair," she said, her voice trembling. He held up a single imperious finger, not bothering to turn around. "And if the board has an issue with the revised projections, Julian, that sounds like a you problem, not a me problem, execute the play," he commanded into his screen. "Alistair, it's the baby." Mira breathed another wave of pain, making her knees weak. "Something's wrong. I need to go. Now." Only then did he swivel his chair. He looked at her, his expression not of concern, but of profound annoyance. The warmth he reserved for the public was gone, replaced by an icy contempt that was now terrifyingly familiar. "What is it now, Mira?" He sighed, as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. "The pains, they're bad. I think it might be another false alarm." He cut in, his eyes narrowed. "You said the same thing 3 weeks ago. It was indigestion. We have the annual shareholders' preliminary call in 10 minutes. This is not indigestion," she cried, tears of fear and frustration welling in her eyes. "I was a nurse. I know the difference. Please, Alistair, take me to the hospital." He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. It was as if he were weighing a business decision, calculating risks and liabilities. The silence stretched, punctuated only by her ragged breathing. Finally, with an air of theatrical martyrdom, he logged off his call. "Fine," he snapped, grabbing his car keys. "But if this is another one of your dramatic episodes, so help me go." The drive to St. Jude's Medical Center, a prestigious hospital where the Finch name guaranteed a private suite and immediate attention, was the longest of Mira's life. Alistair drove with a controlled fury, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his black Bentley. He didn't speak to her, didn't ask about her pain, didn't offer a single word of comfort. He just radiated a cold, pulsating anger. As they swept into the private admissions wing, the flurry of activity began. Nurses rushed to her, a wheelchair was brought, and she was quickly taken to an examination room. Alistair followed, not like a concerned husband, but like a warden overseeing a prisoner. A doctor, a woman with kind eyes, named Dr. Chen, performed a swift, efficient examination. "The contractions are irregular, but strong," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "And there's some slight dilation. It's very early, Mrs. Finch. We need to admit you immediately. We'll start a course of steroids to help the baby's lung development and medication to try and stop the labor. The goal is to keep that baby in for as long as we possibly can." Relief so potent it was dizzying washed over Mira. They would help her. They would save her baby. She looked over at Alistair, expecting to see that same relief mirrored on his face. Instead, she saw nothing. His face was a mask of stone. "And what is the cost of this course of action?" Alistair asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Dr. Chen blinked, taken aback. "Mr. Finch, our priority right now is the health of your wife and child." "I am aware of your priorities," he said, cutting her off. "I asked you a question. What is the cost?" Visibly flustered, the doctor stammered, I couldn't say. Several days of monitoring in a private suite, multiple medications, specialist consultations. It would be substantial." "But surely your insurance—" Alistair simply stared at her, then turned his gaze on Mira. "We'll discuss this with administration." He ushered a stunned Dr. Chen out of the room, and then turned back to his wife. A nurse came in to help Mira change into a hospital gown and get settled into a bed. Alistair stood by the door, scrolling through his phone, looking utterly detached from the life-or-death drama unfolding around his own family. An hour later, a hospital administrator, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Davies, entered the room, a tablet in her hand. Alistair finally put his phone away and stood up all business. "Mrs. Finch, so glad we're getting you settled," Mrs. Davies began, with a practiced smile. "Mr. Finch, we just need to confirm the payment details for the admission. Your file indicates a direct billing preference to the Finch Global corporate account, as with your previous visits." Alistair gave a curt nod. "That is correct. However, there has been a change in policy." Mrs. Davies's smile faltered. "Oh." Mira watched from her bed, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The medication to stop her contractions was slowly starting to work, but the knot of anxiety was tightening with every word her husband spoke. "The Finch Global account," Alistair said, his voice clear and resonant, as if he were closing a hostile takeover, "will not be used for this admission." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Davies looked from Alistair to Mira, and back again, her face a canvas of confusion. Mira felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. I don't understand, sir," the administrator said. "Is there another form of payment you'd prefer to use?" "No," Alistair said simply. He turned his all-dead eyes on Mira, who was now sitting bolt upright in the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare, a cruel, twisted joke. "Alistair, what are you doing?" Mira whispered, her voice cracking. He ignored her, addressing only Mrs. Davies. "This is a personal matter, not a corporate expense." "Of course, Mr. Finch," Mrs. Davies said, struggling to maintain her professional composure. "In that case, we will need a personal credit card or a deposit for the estimated stay, which could be upwards of $50,000 given the neonatal intensive care that might be required." Alistair didn't even blink. He let the silence hang in the air, a testament to his decision. He was a man worth over $10 billion. $50,000 was less than a rounding error to him. It was the cost of the watch on his wrist. Tears were now streaming down Mira's face. "Alistair, please," she begged. "This is our baby, our child." He finally looked at her, and in that moment, she saw the full, unvarnished truth of his soul. It was a barren, desolate place. The suspicion that had been festering in his mind for months now came pouring out in a single venomous whisper, meant for her ears alone, but audible enough for the horrified administrator to hear. "Is it Mira?" he murmured, leaning closer. "Are you absolutely certain about that?" The implication struck her with the force of a physical blow. The hints, the paranoia, the questions about Liam, it all crashed down on her. He didn't believe the baby was his. This was his punishment. This was his cruelty made manifest. He was willing to risk the life of their unborn child on the altar of his poisoned, baseless jealousy. "So to be clear, Mrs. Davies said, her voice now trembling with a mixture of shock and outrage, "you are refusing to provide payment for your pregnant wife's emergency medical care." Alistair straightened his tie, his face a mask of indifference. He looked at Mira one last time, his eyes sweeping over her with utter disdain. "This," he said, his voice returning to its full authoritative volume for the administrator and any nurses in the hallway to hear, "is not my responsibility." With that, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room. He didn't look back. The sound of his expensive shoes clicking down the polished hallway was the sound of Mira's world shattering into a million pieces. She was left alone in the sterile white room, the beep of the fetal heart monitor, a frantic, lonely rhythm in the sudden, crushing silence. She was pregnant in premature labor, and her billionaire husband had just abandoned her, publicly disowning her and their unborn child, leaving her to face the terrifying prospect of being a woman with no money, no power, and a baby whose life hung in the balance. The kind face of Dr. Chen reappeared, her expression filled with a pity that made Mira feel even smaller. "Don't you worry, Mira," she said softly, taking her hand. "We are not going to let anything happen to you or your baby. We'll figure out the paperwork later. You just rest." But Mira couldn't rest. The shame, the fear, the absolute betrayal were a poison more potent than any medication. After a few hours, when the contractions had subsided and her condition was stable for the moment, a social worker came to speak with her about payment plans, about state aid, about options for women in her situation. The humiliation was absolute. Late that night, against all medical advice, Mira Finch signed herself out of the hospital. She couldn't bear to stay there, to be the object of pity and whispers. She needed to think, to escape the crushing weight of the Finch name. She took a taxi. Her own credit cards had been inexplicably declined back to the cold, empty penthouse. She packed a small bag with a few essentials and her old nursing uniform. Then she took her original car, a humble 10-year-old Honda she'd kept in the building's garage against Alistair's wishes, and drove out of the city, away from the glittering prison. She drove with no destination in mind, tears blurring the city lights into streaks of painful color. Rain began to fall, a miserable, steady downpour that matched the storm inside her soul. As she crossed the George Washington Bridge, the rain intensified, turning into a blinding sheet of water. The traffic slowed to a crawl, and then up ahead through the deluge and the darkness, she saw a flash of metal, heard a sickening, grinding screech, and felt a tremor run through the very structure of the bridge itself. The world outside her small car descended into utter chaos. For a moment, there was only the roar of twisting metal and the percussive symphony of cars colliding. Mira's Honda was far enough back to avoid the initial pileup, but she was trapped. Ahead, a multi-vehicle catastrophe had unfolded. A tanker truck had jackknifed across 3 lanes, its sides split open, and a city bus had slammed into it, its front end crumpled like a paper bag. Cars were accordioned into each other, their lights blinking erratically in the torrential rain. Screams pierced the air, sharp and desperate, followed by the terrifying sound of sirens in the distance. Mira's own trauma. The cold hospital room. Alistair's cruel words was instantly vaporized by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. The years of training the muscle memory from countless nights in the ER took over. Her personal hell didn't matter anymore. The people in those cars were in a real one. Without a second thought, she slammed her car into park, grabbed the small first aid kit from her glove compartment, and threw on the only jacket she had. Her old familiar nursing jacket. The name stitched on the breast, Mira Vance, was from a lifetime ago, a version of herself she thought was gone forever. The moment she stepped out of her car, the freezing rain plastered her hair to her face. Glass crunched under her feet. A man stumbled towards her, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, his eyes wide with shock. "My wife, she's trapped," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at a silver sedan that was pinned between a pickup truck and the bridge's railing. "Okay, stay calm. I'm a nurse," Mira said, her voice a beacon of authority she didn't know she still possessed. "What's your name?" "Marco," he gasped. "Okay, Marco, I need you to go to my car, the blue Honda, and get the blanket from the back seat. Keep yourself warm. I'll check on your wife. Emergency services are on their way." The command seemed to steady him. As he shuffled off, Mira scrambled towards the sedan. The driver's side was crushed, but the passenger door was accessible. She wrenched it open and saw a woman, pale and gasping, her leg pinned at a gruesome angle. "Hi, my name is Mira. I'm a nurse," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "What's your name?" "Sophia," the woman whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Okay, Sophia, we're going to get you out of here. I need you to focus on your breathing for me. In and out, slow and deep." Mira did a rapid assessment. The leg was clearly broken, but there was no major arterial bleeding. The immediate danger was shock and the structural instability of the car, which was perched precariously against the railing, the dark, churning water of the Hudson visible below. She used a scarf from the woman's seat to fashion a makeshift pressure bandage on a laceration on her arm, all the while keeping up a stream of calm, reassuring chatter. For the next hour, as chaos reigned and the first responders struggled to reach the heart of the wreckage, Mira became a one-woman triage unit. She moved from car to car, a heavily pregnant angel in a soaked nursing jacket. She used a man's tie to create a tourniquet for a victim with a severe arm injury. She calmed a hysterical child trapped in a back seat by singing a lullaby, her voice clear and steady, despite the tremor in her own body. She pulled an elderly man from a smoking vehicle, ignoring the dull ache in her lower back and the very real danger of an explosion. She was so focused, so completely immersed in the life and death calculus of trauma care, that she didn't notice the news van that had arrived on the scene. A cameraman, protected by a large umbrella held by a production assistant, was panning across the wreckage. He zoomed in on the lone figure, moving with purpose through the disaster. He saw the pregnant belly, the determined set of her jaw, the professional way she was directing other less injured victims to assist. He kept the camera rolling. "Who is that?" the on-air reporter, a seasoned journalist named David Chen, asked into his microphone, his voice filled with awe. "In the midst of this horror, it appears we have a hero. A pregnant woman, clearly a medical professional, is single-handedly running triage on the George Washington Bridge. An unbelievable act of bravery." The footage was raw, powerful, and utterly compelling. It was beamed out live across every major news network in the tri-state area, and soon the nation. People watching at home, horrified by the unfolding tragedy, were captivated by the image of this anonymous pregnant woman who had run towards the danger, not away from it. By the time the paramedics and firefighters finally broke through the traffic jam and took control of the scene, Mira was exhausted, soaked to the bone, and trembling from cold and exertion. A fire captain, his face smudged with soot, approached her. "Ma'am, you need to let us take over. You're pregnant, you shouldn't be out here." He looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. "You've done an incredible thing here tonight. You saved lives. What's your name?" Mira just shook her head, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "I just did what anyone would do." She didn't want recognition. She wanted to disappear. She saw the news cameras, and her heart seized with a new kind of fear. The last thing she wanted was to be found by Alistair. She slipped away in the confusion, refusing medical attention for herself. She found Marco and Sophia being loaded into an ambulance. Sophia grabbed her hand as she passed. "Thank you," she wept. "You saved me." Mira simply nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She found her old Honda miraculously undamaged and managed to navigate it through the slowly clearing lanes. She drove until the city was a distant glow in her rearview mirror, her mind a blank slate of exhaustion. She finally pulled into a small, nondescript motel in a quiet New Jersey town, paid for a room with the last of the cash she'd grabbed, and collapsed onto the bed, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. She was unaware that on millions of screens, the legend of the Angel of the Bridge was just beginning. Alistair Finch woke to the purr of his silent butler alarm, which gradually brightened the lights in his penthouse to simulate a gentle dawn. He stretched the fine silk sheets cool against his skin. He had slept soundly, the righteous sleep of a man who believed he had excised a cancer from his life. The brief, irritating drama with Mira at the hospital was already a fading memory, an unpleasant business transaction that was now closed. His morning routine was sacrosanct. Espresso, a glance at the pre-market numbers from Tokyo and London, and then the morning news on the 85-inch screen in his dressing room. As he buttoned his bespoke shirt, he listened with half an ear to the top story, the catastrophic pile-up on the George Washington Bridge. He felt a flicker of annoyance. The incident would snarl traffic and likely delay some of his junior executives. Then the reporter's voice shifted from grave to awestruck. But the real story last night was the incredible heroism of one woman, an unidentified Good Samaritan, now being called the Angel of the Bridge. Alistair glanced at the screen. The footage was grainy shot in the pouring rain, but the image was unmistakable. A woman, her form made bulky by a jacket and the distinct curve of a late-term pregnancy, was kneeling beside an overturned car. He watched intrigued as the camera zoomed in. She was wearing a nurse's jacket. She turned her head slightly, her profile illuminated for just a second by the flashing lights of an emergency vehicle. Alistair froze, his hands stilled on his cufflinks. It couldn't be. He snatched the remote and rewound the footage, his heart starting to pound with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. He played it again, this time in slow motion. The rain-streaked face, the determined jawline, the specific way she moved. It was her. It was Mira. A cold dread far more potent than the anger of the previous day began to seep into his bones. What was she doing there? Why was she wearing that ridiculous old jacket? The story painted her as a hero he had thrown out of a hospital less than 12 hours earlier. His phone rang shrill in the silent apartment. It was Julian, his head of PR, a man whose unflappable demeanor was his greatest asset. Today he sounded like he was having a panic attack. "Alistair, have you seen the news?" Julian's voice was tight. "I'm looking at it now." Alistair said, his own voice dangerously calm. "That's not the problem." "Well, it's a problem, but it's not the problem. The problem is St. Jude's. What about it? Someone talked Alistair. Someone leaked the whole damn story. An administrator, they think. A Mrs. Davies. It's on a couple of the more aggressive news blogs right now. But it's spreading like wildfire. Billionaire Alistair Finch refuses to pay for pregnant wife's emergency care. They're connecting it to the angel of the bridge. They're saying you threw a hero out on the street. Alistair felt the world tilt on its axis. This wasn't a contained issue. This was a narrative. And in the world of public perception, narrative was reality. He was being cast as the villain in a story where his wife, the wife he had just accused of infidelity and abandoned, was the nation's new sweetheart. "Kill it," Alistair commanded, the old arrogance returning. "Call our friends at Omnicorp News at GNN. Pay them whatever they want. I want this story buried." "It's too late," Julian almost shrieked. "This has gone viral. It's organic. The hashtags are already trending. That angel of the bridge, Alistair Finch. Justice for Mira. We can't kill it. We're behind it. We have to get in front of it." Meanwhile, in a small apartment in the Bronx, Dr. Liam Carmichael was drinking his morning coffee before heading to his clinic. The news was on in the background, the same story playing out. He watched his heart aching for the victims of the crash. When the footage of the mysterious hero played, he leaned forward, a frown on his face. There was something familiar about her. When a slightly clearer shot appeared, his coffee cup clattered into its saucer. "Mira," he breathed. He knew, instantly. He knew her posture, her focused intensity. He knew that old nursing jacket. He had been there the day she'd bought it. The news report didn't name her, but he didn't need them to. And when he went online and saw the burgeoning scandal about Alistair and St. Jude's, his concern turned to white-hot fury. He knew Alistair's controlling nature had seen Mira's spirit slowly being crushed by it. This was the ultimate act of cruelty. He grabbed his phone, his first instinct to call her. But the call went straight to a disconnected message. Of course. Alistair would have cut her off. A wave of panic washed over him. She was out there somewhere, 8 months pregnant alone, and after her ordeal on the bridge, likely exhausted and emotionally shattered. She had no money, no phone, nowhere to go. Liam started making calls, first to Lenox Hill, then to St. Jude's, trying to find any information. He called the few friends of Mira's he knew, the ones Alistair hadn't managed to alienate. No one had heard from her. He was just a friend, a former colleague, but in that moment he felt a fierce, protective responsibility for her that transcended friendship. He had to find her. The unmasking was completed by mid-morning. The reporter David Chen, driven by the biggest story of his career, had cross-referenced the name on the jacket Vance, with a list of recently departed nurses from major New York hospitals. It led him to her maiden name. A quick search brought up her high-profile wedding to Alistair Finch. By 10 a.m., every news outlet in the country had the headline, "Angel of the Bridge," identified as Mira Finch, wife of billionaire Alistair Finch. The story was no longer just about a hero. It was a fairy tale in reverse. A story of a prince who had revealed himself to be a monster, and a princess who had saved herself and then saved others. And the public was eating it up with a spoon. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Finch Global Enterprises was not just a company, it was a brand, and that brand was inextricably linked to Alistair Finch's carefully cultivated image as a forward-thinking, benevolent genius. The revelation that he was a man who would deny medical care to his pregnant hero wife didn't just tarnish that image, it shattered it into 1,000,000 pieces. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opened, Finch Global's stock was already in free fall in pre-market trading. When the opening bell rang, it plunged. Billions of dollars in market capitalization were wiped out in minutes. The board of directors, a collection of old money titans and Silicon Valley veterans who normally revered Alistair, were in open revolt. Their emergency conference call was a bloodbath. "What in God's name were you thinking, Alistair?" demanded Marcus Thorne, a board member whose family had run in New York's elite circles for a century. "This was a private matter, a misunderstanding," Alistair blustered, but his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. He sounded rattled. "A private matter that has cost our shareholders $12 billion in the last 90 minutes, another board member yelled. "Our entire portfolio of consumer-facing tech is built on an image of trust and progressivism. You've made us look like feudal villains. We have women's groups calling for a global boycott." Alistair's attempts to control the narrative were pathetic. He released a statement through Julian, talking of a moment of intense personal stress and his deep concern and pride for his wife. No one bought it. The story from the hospital, confirmed by 2 anonymous nurses and the administrator Mrs. Davies, who had been promptly fired and was now lawyering up, was too visceral, too damning. The image of the richest man in the city counting pennies while his wife was in premature labor was a stain that couldn't be washed away. His desperation grew. He hired private investigators, tasking them with a single mission: find Mira. "I don't care what it costs." He snarled at the head of the security firm. "I need her back here. We'll do a joint interview. She'll explain the misunderstanding. We can fix this." He still believed that everyone and everything had a price. But Mira was gone. She had woken up in the drab motel room to the sound of a television in the next room. Her face was on the screen. Her name was being spoken. She watched, horrified, as her private agony was laid bare for the world to see. They were calling her a hero, but they were also painting her as a victim, a damsel in distress. She didn't want to be either. She just wanted to be safe. She knew Alistair would be looking for her, and she knew that if he found her, he would use her, manipulate her, and trap her all over again. Her baby deserved better. Just as despair began to set in, there was a soft knock on her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was him. He'd found her. She peered through the peephole and saw a man she vaguely recognized. It was Marco, the man from the bridge whose wife Sophia she had helped. He looked nervous. "Mrs. Finch, Mira," he called softly. "Please don't be afraid. It's Marco from last night." Hesitantly, she opened the door. He was holding a bag of groceries and a newspaper with her face on the front page. "My wife Sophia, she sent me," he said quickly, his eyes kind. "She's at her sister's house just a few towns over. She was so worried about you. She saw the news about your husband. We wanted to make sure you were okay, that you had somewhere to go." Tears sprang to Mira's eyes. The simple, genuine kindness from a stranger was more moving than any grand gesture Alistair had ever made. "We have a spare room," Marco continued. "It's not a penthouse, but it's safe. No one would think to look for you there. Please, let us help you. You helped us." She had nowhere else to go. She accepted. Marco and Sophia's family, a boisterous, loving Italian-American clan, welcomed her not as a celebrity or a victim, but as one of their own. They fed her, fussed over her, and most importantly, they protected her. They created a cocoon of normalcy and safety around her, shielding her from the media storm raging just outside their door. For days, Mira rested, the constant stress finally beginning to ease. She allowed herself to feel the baby kick, not with fear, but with a growing sense of fierce maternal love. This baby was hers alone. Meanwhile, Liam Carmichael's search was becoming more frantic. He had put his clinic on hold, working every contact he had. He finally got a lead from a paramedic he knew who had been on the bridge. The paramedic remembered seeing a man from a silver sedan talking to Mira. Working with the scant details, Liam managed to track down Marco's contact information through a hospital social worker. When he finally called and explained who he was, Sophia got on the phone, her voice cautious. "Why are you looking for her?" "Because I'm her friend," Liam said, his voice raw with emotion. "And I'm worried sick. I'm a doctor. I just want to make sure she and the baby are healthy. I swear to you I won't tell anyone where she is." After a long conversation with Mira, Sophia agreed. Liam drove to the small suburban house, his heart pounding. When Mira opened the door, the relief on both their faces was palpable. "Liam," she whispered, and then she was in his arms, sobbing with the release of a week's worth of terror and uncertainty. He just held her, stroking her hair. "I found you," he said softly. "You're safe now." He gave her a full checkup. The baby was fine, her contractions had stopped, but she was exhausted and emotionally fragile. He promised to arrange for discreet, high-quality prenatal care. For the first time in a very long time, Mira felt like she could breathe. She had a friend. She had allies. She wasn't alone. Alistair's private investigators were good, frighteningly good. Despite the family's best efforts to shield her a stray credit card charge by one of Sophia's cousins for prenatal vitamins, the same item that had once drawn Alistair's scrutiny was flagged. The investigators descended on the quiet suburban street like wolves. Liam had just arrived for a visit when a fleet of black SUVs pulled up, blocking the street. Alistair Finch stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was thinner, his face drawn and pale, but he wore the same impeccably tailored suit, a piece of armor against the world. The family formed a protective circle on the front lawn, but Alistair's men, large and menacing, brushed them aside. Alistair's eyes locked on the front door which Mira had just opened. He saw her, her belly larger now, standing beside Liam. The sight of them together ignited the paranoid fantasy in his mind into a raging inferno. "So it's true," Alistair said, his voice dripping with venom. He strode towards them, his gaze fixed on Liam. "I should have known. Hiding here with your lover while my life is being systematically destroyed." "She's not hiding with me, Alistair," Liam said, stepping slightly in front of Mira. "She's being protected from you." "Stay out of this, Carmichael. This is a family matter," Alistair snarled. He then turned his focus to Mira, and his whole demeanor shifted. He tried to summon the old charm, the manipulative tenderness that had once worked so well. "Mira, my love," he said, his voice softening. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. I was under enormous pressure. I wasn't myself. Please come home. We can fix this. We'll release a statement. Go on television. We'll tell them the truth." Mira looked at the man she had once loved and felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. The fear was gone, replaced by a strength she didn't know she had. "The truth, Alistair?" she asked, her voice steady. "The truth is that you left me. You left our child to die because of your disgusting, baseless suspicions. You didn't care about my health. You only cared about your money and your name." "I can give you anything," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "The penthouse, the jet's a new charitable foundation in your name. Anything you want. Just come back. I need you." "No," Mira said the single word, landing with the finality of a guillotine. "You don't need me. You need a prop. You need to repair your image. But I am not for sale. I am not your asset to be managed." Alistair's face contorted in rage. The mask slipped completely, revealing the ugly, insecure man beneath. "You ungrateful bitch!" he screamed, lunging forward. "I gave you everything. I plucked you from obscurity. You are nothing without me." Liam moved to block him, but Mira held up a hand, stopping him. She would face this herself. "You're wrong, Alistair," she said, her voice ringing with newfound power. "I was someone long before I met you. A nurse. A person who helped people. You're the one who tried to make me nothing. And you almost succeeded." She took a deep breath, ready to deliver the final blow, a truth she had pieced together from a stray comment from Dr. Chen and her own medical knowledge. "But I know the real reason you did this. It wasn't about Liam. It wasn't even about your suspicion. It was about your shame." Alistair froze, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "You knew, didn't you?" Mira continued, her voice soft but relentless. "You've known for months. You're sterile, Alistair. I remember Dr. Chen mentioning you'd had some discreet tests at the hospital months ago. You got the results right around the time I started volunteering at the clinic, right when you turned cold." The color drained from Alistair's face. It was true. His deepest, most guarded secret. The billionaire visionary, the master of the universe, was incapable of producing an heir. The Finch dynasty would die with him. "You couldn't face it," Mira said, the full, tragic picture now crystal clear. "Your ego couldn't handle the truth. So you invented a new truth. A story where I was the villain, the unfaithful wife. You needed to believe I cheated because the alternative that this baby, this miracle baby that I wanted so badly, wasn't yours, simply because you couldn't be a father was too much for you to bear. You didn't abandon me because you thought the baby wasn't yours. You abandoned me because you knew he couldn't be." The revelation hung in the air, devastating in its simplicity. Alistair Finch, the man who controlled everything, had been undone by the one thing he couldn't control: his own biology. His cruelty wasn't an act of strength, but one of profound, pathetic weakness. He stared at her, his empire crumbling around him, his lies exposed. He had nothing left, no power, no charm, no threats that could touch her. He looked from Mira's defiant face to Liam's protective stance, and he finally truly broke. With a strangled sob, he turned and stumbled back to his car, a defeated, hollowed-out man. The departure of Alistair Finch was not the end of the storm, but the beginning of a profound, cleansing calm. The days that followed his humiliating retreat were a blur of headlines. Mira watched detached as the empire Alistair had built on fear and brilliance began to publicly crumble. The final fatal blow came from an anonymous leak, likely one of his own disgraced investigators, confirming his sterility. It was a deeply personal detail she never would have revealed, but the world seized upon it, not with sympathy, but as the key that unlocked the puzzle of his cruelty. The Finch Global Board, desperate to staunch the bleeding of their stock and reputation, acted with surgical brutality. Alistair was not just forced to resign, he was erased. A terse press release announced his immediate departure and the installation of a new CEO. 2 days later came the masterstroke of public relations, the announcement of the Mira Foundation for Maternal and Child Health, seeded with a staggering $100 million endowment. It was a transparent, if effective, act of corporate penance. Mira's lawyer, a sharp woman provided by Liam's network, called her to discuss the inevitable divorce settlement. "They're prepared to offer you another 50 million personally," the lawyer said. "A golden apology." Sitting in Sophia's cozy living room, the scent of garlic and simmering tomatoes in the air, Mira felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. "I don't want his money," she said, her voice firm. "I want nothing with the Finch name on it. Tell them to put it all in the foundation, all of it." The lawyer was stunned into silence for a moment. "Mira, that is an extraordinary gesture." "It's not a gesture," she replied, looking around at the simple, loving home that had become her sanctuary. "It's a firewall. I want my life back, not a golden cage. My son will have everything he needs because I will provide it." Her decision, when it inevitably became public, cemented her status. She wasn't a wronged wife, seeking revenge or riches. She was a woman of unshakable integrity. The angel of the bridge had become something more, a symbol of grace and quiet strength. The final weeks of her pregnancy passed in a bubble of unprecedented peace. The boisterous, loving chaos of Marco and Sophia's extended family was a balm on her soul. They didn't treat her like a celebrity. They treated her like a cousin, arguing with her over what to name the baby, forcing second helpings of pasta on her, and shooing her onto the couch when she looked tired. Liam was a constant, steady presence. He never pushed, never presumed. He would come by after his shifts at the clinic sometimes with takeout, sometimes just to sit with her on the porch swing as dusk settled. They talked for hours, not just about the baby, but about their lives before Alistair, about their shared passion for medicine, about their dreams for a world that was a little kinder. In those quiet moments, a new connection formed, deeper than friendship, built on a foundation of shared values and profound respect. It was an unspoken promise of a future, one they would be free to explore when the time was right. 2 weeks after Alistair's final pathetic confrontation, Mira went into labor. It began not with a stab of fear, but with a calm certainty. This time, there were no cold corridors or calculated cruelties. Liam drove her to a local community hospital, the one where he had once done his residency. Sophia was there, refusing to leave her side, holding her hand and breathing with her through every contraction. The delivery room was filled not with tension, but with love and encouragement. Liam was there, a perfect blend of supportive friend and professional advocate, translating the medical jargon and ensuring her wishes were honored. As the final push came, Mira didn't feel the crushing weight of an heir's birthright. She felt the pure, primal power of a mother, bringing her child into the world on her own terms. She gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. As the nurse laid him on her chest, his tiny, perfect face scrunched up in a silent cry, the last remnants of the Finch mansion's gilded cage turned to dust and blew away. The trauma, the betrayal, the fear, it all dissolved in the face of a love so fierce and absolute, it felt like it could reshape the world. A few days later, she sat in a rocking chair in the warm, sunlit room that Sophia's family had painted a soft yellow for her. Her son, whom she had named Leo Vance, slept peacefully in her arms. The weight of him was real solid, a wonderful anchor to this new life. Liam sat quietly in a chair beside her, watching them with a gentle smile. "What will you do now?" he asked softly, his voice full of warmth. Mira looked down at Leo, then up at Liam, and a real radiant smile lit up her face, reaching deep into her eyes. "I think I'm going to be a nurse again," she said, her voice clear and sure. "And a mother. I think that's more than enough." She was no longer Mrs. Alistair Finch. the billionaire's wife. She was Mira Vance, a mother, a survivor, a hero defined not by wealth or tragedy, but by her own choices. Her future was not written in stock prices or tabloid headlines, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of her own child's breathing. She was free, and she was finally home. From the cold, sterile halls of a hospital where she was abandoned to the chaotic, rain-swept scene of a disaster where she became a hero, Mira's journey is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. We've watched her fall from the highest echelons of society, betrayed by the man who promised to protect her, only to rise again, not on a foundation of wealth or power, but on her own integrity, courage, and the kindness of strangers. This story is a reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in character. Mira lost a fortune, but found herself, and in doing so, she captured the heart of a nation. Her triumph wasn't just over a cruel husband, but over fear and despair itself, ending in the quiet, beautiful victory of a new life and a new beginning. If Mira's incredible story of strength and redemption inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see a story of hope and triumph over adversity. And most importantly, make sure you are subscribed and have clicked the notification bell so you don't miss our next powerful drama. What part of Mira's journey moved you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.